This was the most modern, high-tech, and best Mercedes you could buy in the 1960s and 1970s. The Grosser Mercedes-Benz 600. So this is basically how the model looks like in its box. You can see that this is a hard plastic case, as is the case for most 143 scale cars. And if we take a look at the back of this car, or this box I should say, we're going to find a few stats on this Mercedes-Benz 600 Pullman from the year 1963. You can see that it has a V8 engine with 6.3 liter capacity, 250 horsepower, it's a 4-speed automatic, top speed 205 kilometers per hour, 9.7 seconds from 0 to 100. Considering it's a stretch limousine, that's actually pretty impressive, especially for a car that's 50 years old. Not very fuel efficient, let's face it. And it was built from 1963 to 1981. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to unbox this car for you. The cover lifts up pretty easily. And what we have behind is a black and white, or I should say sepia tone picture of the Mercedes-Benz 600 Pullman. But here's the real deal. Bearing the internal code name W100, the Mercedes 600 had an 18-year production run from 1963 to 1981 and was pretty much the company's ultra-luxury flagship model, primarily for celebrities and heads of state. The kind of people who would otherwise buy a Rolls-Royce. The first S-Class, the W116, was not made until 1972. Before that, there was the W109, and before that, the W112. But neither of those were as luxurious as the W100. In fact, this car did not get a proper successor until the modern Maybach Mark was reborn in the mid-2000s in the form of the 57 and 62. The regular short wheelbase Mercedes 600 had many famous owners, from Aristotle Onassis over Elvis Presley, Elizabeth Taylor, David Bowie, Eric Clapton, and John Lennon to Jay Leno and the Pope. But one of the biggest things about the Grosse, which, by the way, is German for simply big, was its list of infamous owners. If we take all variants, including this Pullman and the Landaulet, into consideration, the list of owners included the Soviet Union's Leonid Brezhnev, Romania's Nicolae Ceausescu, Uganda's Idi Amin, Iraq's Saddam Hussein, Haiti's Papadoc Duvalier, Chairman Mao, Yugoslavia's Josip Broz Tito, Iranian Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and Jeremy Clarkson bought one as well. Being the presidential ride of dictators, let's just say this car has garnered a lot of infamy. And this sort of makes sense because the predecessor of the 600 Grosser was the Mercedes 770, whose most famous owner was Adolf Hitler. Now, back in the day, cars did not have power windows, seats, trunk lid, and so on, because the electric motors needed to operate them would have been too big. So instead, it was good old hydraulics. And because of all the hydraulics, this car was so heavy that Mercedes had to rethink their strategy of putting V6 engines into all their cars, and therefore ended up creating a V8 to power this car. The M100 engine, with a displacement of 6.3 liters and 250 horsepower. The top speed of the Grosser was around 200 kilometers per hour. The bottom line is, you do not buy this car for the gas mileage. And it's also a very expensive car to maintain. On the other hand, it was really built to last, so that's what a lot of the owners depend on. There's a funny story actually how I got this car, because normally I don't go for cars from the 1960s and 70s. But CK model cars were having a sale on the Pullman, which they had reduced the price to €12.95. And while I was researching the car, the price shot up to $14.95, and then one day later it was $19.95, and the next day it was sold out. But they still had a short wheelbase version left, and surprisingly in black, and still for $14.95, so I bought the regular Grosser 600 along with a few other 143 scale Mercedes cars like the 500 SEC that I have reviewed last week. But long story short, all of the ones that I bought sold out a day or two later. You gotta admit, €15 was a fantastic price for the car, especially for a black Mercedes which everybody seems to go after. However, I ended up sending the 600 back because it had paint flaws on the rims, fingerprints on the interior of the windows, and the paint was scuffed on the roof, which you can see in these photos. But before I sent it back, I took a few comparison shots with this Pullman I managed to pick up on eBay for €12 and €6 shipping. So here are the pictures, and they give you an idea of what the size difference is between the regular Grosser 600 and this Pullman. In 1/18 scale, there's two versions of this car, both of them being the long wheelbase Pullmans. Sunstar makes one that used to retail for around €100 until recently, but the price has shot up to like $140 in the past few months. It also has pegs on the headlights. 2 pegs on each headlight, in fact, which look horrendous. The trunk does not open, and I've heard that the doors don't always close properly either. Still, it's a great model for the price, especially when you consider the alternative, which is the one made by AutoArt. If you're lucky, you can find it for less than €1,000. Yeah. Welcome to the Diecast hobby. So all things considered, I'm lucky I managed to get this one for €12, and apart from the pegs, I'm very happy with the quality. I really think ixo is an underappreciated 143 scale maker. The model appears almost black in low light conditions, however in bright light conditions, it's actually a metallic dark blue, or almost a turquoise dark bluish mix. So taking a look at the front of the car, you can see that they've actually put a lot of detail into this 143 scale model. The headlight glass over here actually has a texture on it, and over here as well. And the headlight itself is also done very realistically. The worst thing about this model is arguably these pegs down here, these black ones. So, apart from that, however, like the rest of the light is pretty convincing. And you can also see that at the very bottom we have the indicator over here and over here. If you look at the license plate, it says 600 Pullman. We got a chrome bumper at the front. And perhaps the highlight of the front is this Mercedes star right here. It is extremely thin and fragile, and in proportion to the rest of the car. I mean, I have seen a thicker Mercedes-Benz front grille star on a 1/18 scale Maisto Mercedes E-Class. So compared to that, we have here a really well-designed one. And the front grille is also pretty good, although you can see that it does have a few paint flaws, I guess. But if you have a little bit of a black paint, you should be able to fix this yourself. Looking at the front windshield, you can see that the wiper blades here are separate pieces. They're made out of chrome, and They look pretty nice, resting on top of each other like this. The windshield is clear plastic. And over here you actually have these two windshield washer nozzles. They are not painted. However, on the regular 600 made by ixo, where you can see a picture of it right here, they are painted. So that is one difference between these two cars. But otherwise the front is pretty identical. And over here is, of course, the hood, and it cannot be opened since this is a 143 scale car, but inside you will find the engine, which is the M100 Mercedes-Benz engine. Another detail you can see here are the side view mirrors, and they are done in a beautiful chrome. Taking a look at the side of the car, this is where you really get to appreciate the length of this Pullman. It's almost like a stretch limousine. You can see that between the front and the rear doors, there is a middle section where we have two seats that face the rear seats. So it's kind of like a compartment back there. Another difference between this Pullman version and the regular 600 is that on the regular 600 by ixo, this key lock here is painted in silver, but it isn't on the Pullman. But again, this is something that you can rectify yourself if you have a little bit of silver paint. Looking at the top of the car, you can see that we have here a sunroof for the rear passengers, however, it is closed. Now let's take a closer look at the rims of the Mercedes 600. And you can see these are your typical old school 1960s wheels. You can see that we have a white line running along the tire wall, Mercedes-Benz logo in the middle, all the good stuff. And now let's take a look at the rear wheels. And here's a look at the back of the car, and this is probably where you'll notice the second and third flaw of this model. The second one being that the taillights also have pegs right in the center, which is annoying, but yeah. Another flaw on this 600 Pullman compared to the regular 600 is that if you look at the indicators, these are basically orange paint. So there's like a layer of paint on top of the taillight, because the taillight is made from this transparent red material, but the indicator isn't. However, on the regular 600, you can see that on the taillight, the indicator is part of the taillight. It's not like a separate paint on the taillight. So I don't know why they decided to change it up on the 600 Pullman compared to the regular 600. However, something that the 600 Pullman has but the regular 600 does not have are these curtains. Now these curtains are not made out of fabric, they're just plastic. However, they do have these lines which kind of make them look like real curtains. And I think it is better than nothing, and keep in mind the price of this car. This is actually a nice addition, which gives the whole limousine this sort of feel of exclusivity. And here's a look at some detail on the rear deck. So you can see that we have like this vent here. And you can also see that the headrests of the rear passengers have these chrome pieces with which they're mounted on the rear deck. So now let's move on to the interior of this car. And you can see that the interior is kept in this dark brown, almost caramel kind of color. And there's not much to see, unfortunately, because this is a small 143 scale car. But you can see the center console over here from the passenger side, and there's a little bit of detail there. You can see the gauges as well. And now moving on to the driver's side, you can see that they did put some effort in designing this 1960s Mercedes-Benz steering wheel. It's got the Mercedes-Benz logo in the middle, and a semicircular ring made out of chrome underneath. You can see the gauge cluster as well. And the seats themselves have a texture going on. The transmission is a 4-speed automatic, so you don't have to bother with the gearbox. As we move on to the passenger side, this is the most luxurious area of the 600 Pullman. You can see the seating arrangement, as I mentioned earlier, is 2 passengers at the rear and 2 passengers facing them, so it's 4 at the back. And over here we can see what appears to be like a sort of mini fridge with a few buttons on it. And the rear seats also have these details, this pattern on them. You can see that we also have a rear center armrest. But yeah, I mean, don't expect too much detail for a 1/43 scale car. I think given the circumstances, this is still pretty well done. And finally, here's a look at the bottom of the vehicle. You can see that it says 143 Mercedes 600. You can see that we have a few details here, like a separate, or I should say 2 separate exhaust systems, complete with mufflers leading up to the tailpipes. Got a fuel tank here. And up front, we have the transmission detail. Tires also have some tread on them. Guys, I hope you liked this review. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for more videos to come. This is Imperial Diecast, signing out.